Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going deep today. We're diving into Job.
Oh, Job.
Yeah, but specifically this sermon called Suffering and Grace, the Wisdom of the Cross, and how it deals with some pretty intense questions,
Yeah.
about suffering and grace.
Well, it's a story that's resonated with people for, centuries.
Right.
Because, at some point we all face that same question. Why do bad things happen to good people?
Yeah.
And how do we keep faith when things just fall apart?
Exactly. And that's what I think is so interesting about how this sermon starts out, because it throws us right into the story of Job,
Yeah.
who is like, described as this blameless and upright guy, right?
Right.
And then bam, all of a sudden he loses everything, his wealth, his kids, even his servants.
Yeah. It really highlights how suffering can be like so sudden,
Yeah.
not this gradual decline.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Absolutely. But the thing that really struck me was how Job reacted. He grieves, of course. I mean, how could you not?
Right.
But he doesn't get angry at God or blame God.
Yeah.
He actually says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart.
Yeah.
The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised.
That's Job 1.21, right?
Yes.
And I think it really gets at this idea of faith, right?
Yeah.
It's not that Job doesn't feel the pain, the loss. He's not, minimizing that.
Yeah.
But he sees it through this lens of God's sovereignty,
Yeah. Right.
Like he's saying, okay, this really hurts.
Right.
But I still trust in God.
Yeah, it's like he's acknowledging there's a bigger picture here.
Yeah.
That I don't necessarily understand,
That's right.
but I still trust you.
Right.
And I think that's such a powerful idea.
Yeah.
It really makes you think, right?
Mm-hmm.
How often do we get caught up in the material things?
Yeah.
In the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
And what would it look like if we could have that level of trust, even when everything's taken away?
It's a challenge for sure. And then, the sermon takes this idea of faith even further.
Okay.
With this shocking scene.
Yeah.
The dialogue between God and Satan.
Right.
Up in heaven.
Yeah. This part was intense. So God's pointing to Job, right?
Yeah.
As this example of a faithful servant.
Right.
And then Satan, he's Satan.
Right.
So he basically argues that, it's easy to be faithful when life is good.
Yeah, he's saying that Job will curse God if things get bad enough.
Exactly. And then it gets really interesting, theologically speaking, at least, because God actually allows Satan to test Job.
Mm-hmm.
But with this one condition, he can't kill him.
Right.
So it's this cosmic bet almost on Job's faith, which honestly raises some ethical questions, right?
Definitely.
I mean, if God's all powerful and good, why would he allow this to happen?
Well, and the sermon is not saying that it's, literally a showdown in heaven.
Right.
I think it's using this dialogue, this imagery, to explore these bigger questions.
Exactly.
About God's sovereignty and how humans deal with suffering.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's pushing us as readers and listeners to think about what does it actually mean to have faith when life gets really hard?
Especially when it throws those curveballs.
Yeah, exactly. So Job's already lost everything, right?
Yeah.
And now there's this heavenly bet going on. It's a lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure.
And then, oh man, the sermon just goes deeper into this idea of suffering. So Job gets hit with these painful sores all over his body. And it's like this image of him sitting in ashes, just so alone and desperate.
That imagery is so powerful.
Isn't it?
It's not just physical suffering. It's societal, too. Job loses his status, his respect, his friends abandon him. Even his wife turns on him.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Even his wife, what does she say? She
says, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die.
Wow. That's, talk about hitting rock bottom. He's lost everything.
Yeah.
Can you even imagine going through that?
It's hard to even fathom.
Losing everything you care about.
Yeah.
And having everyone turn against you. It's awful.
It really forces us to confront, the potential depth of human suffering.
Yeah.
And ask ourselves, how would we react in that kind of situation?
Yeah.
Would our faith hold up?
That's what keeps coming back to me, because even with all of this, Job still refuses to curse God. And he says, shall we receive good from God and shall we not receive evil?
Hmm.
And I think that's where the sermon is getting at the heart of what it means to have faith,
Yeah.
you know?
It's not about, blind optimism
Right.
or pretending that everything's okay.
Yeah.
What's fascinating is that the sermon doesn't portray Job as, simply accepting everything.
Right, right.
It acknowledges how raw his experience is, how difficult this all is.
Mm.
But you see this really profound faith,
Yeah.
almost defiant,
Yeah.
choosing to believe even when faced with just awful circumstances.
Like he's choosing to trust God even though he doesn't understand why this is happening.
Yeah.
I mean, what does that even look like for us today? How do we find that trust when things fall apart?
It's a powerful question, and one I think we'll keep exploring as we dive deeper into Job, and what this sermon's trying to tell us
Yeah.
about suffering and grace. As we're looking at this sermon and how it's unpacking Job,
Yeah.
it's important to remember this dialogue
Right.
between God and Satan.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, we shouldn't take it literally.
So it's not like a cosmic courtroom drama.
Not exactly. It's
Yeah.
more, it's more a literary device
Oh.
to kind of explore these big questions
Yeah.
of good versus evil,
Right.
faith versus doubt.
Yeah.
It's like the author is using this
Right.
this really dramatic setup
Yeah.
to kind of get at this mystery of why bad things happen
Right.
to good people.
And that makes sense because like you were saying, this whole sermon is saying that Job's story isn't like
Right.
be good, get rewarded.
It's way more complex than that.
Right. It's not that simple.
Life rarely fits into neat boxes.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, I think, where this idea of grace
Okay.
really comes in.
Yeah.
It's saying that even when all this suffering is happening,
Yeah.
God's grace is still there.
Okay.
Maybe not in a way that magically fixes everything,
Right.
but in a way that's sustaining Job's spirit.
Yeah. That's really interesting because it would be so easy to look at Job's situation
Right.
and just be like, well, where is God in all of this?
Right.
But what you're saying is that the sermon is saying that
Yeah.
grace works on a different level.
It does. It works on a deeper level.
Yeah.
That's maybe harder for us to see sometimes.
I see what you mean. That's a good point. And it kind of connects to another idea that the sermon brings up.
Okay.
This idea that suffering, like as awful as it is,
Yeah.
it can be like this catalyst
It can be.
for spiritual growth.
Yeah, like Job,
Yeah.
through all these trials, he develops this much deeper understanding
Okay.
of who God is.
Right.
Not just, as someone who gives us good things,
Uh,
but as a force that's present even in the darkness.
so it's not saying that like suffering is good
No,
or we should like seek it out,
Not at all.
but recognizing that it can lead to transformation.
Exactly. Yeah, and the way we respond to suffering
Right.
plays a huge role in that transformation.
Okay.
The sermon emphasizes Job's faith,
Yeah.
his refusal to curse God,
Right.
as evidence of how grace can really empower us, even when, we don't have all the answers.
It's like faith isn't about having it all figured out.
What's that?
It's about trusting even when we don't understand what's happening.
Yeah, and that trust, that unwavering belief,
Yeah.
that's what gives Job the strength to endure.
Okay.
He doesn't pretend it's easy.
Right.
He doesn't pretend to understand why it's happening.
Right.
He just chooses to hold on to his faith,
Yeah.
even when everything else is stripped away.
Which brings us back to the title of the sermon, Suffering and Grace. It's not one or the other.
Right.
Suffering is just part of life.
Right.
But grace is like this force that helps us move through it,
Yeah.
to grow from it, to come out the other side and understand themselves and God.
Right. And that message is something, I think we can all connect with,
Right.
regardless of what we believe.
Yeah.
It speaks to like the human spirit to overcome
Mm-hmm.
the power of faith
Right.
and the fact that grace endures
Yeah.
even when we face unimaginable suffering.
So as we're, thinking about this deep dive into Job,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways?
Well, I think the first one is that suffering is universal.
Yeah.
None of us are immune to pain,
Right.
to loss, but this sermon also reminds us that we're not alone.
Yeah.
God's grace is there,
Okay.
even when we can't feel it
Right.
or make sense of it.
Yeah. And it makes us think about how we react
Right.
to those tough times.
Yeah.
Do we just get bitter?
Yeah.
Or do we try to hold on to faith like Job did?
Yeah, and it encourages us to look beyond the surface
Okay.
of suffering. It's not about seeking out pain,
Right.
but recognizing that it can be an opportunity for growth,
Okay.
for change,
Yeah.
for understanding ourselves and our faith on a much deeper level.
So this ancient story, it still has something to say to us today. It does. It offers, some guidance,
Yeah.
some comfort, some hope
Mm-hmm.
as we face those challenges in life.
It reminds us that the human journey
Yeah.
is marked by both suffering and grace.
Yeah.
And that space between those two,
Right.
that's where we discover our own strength
Okay.
and the steadfast nature of God's love.
So we're gonna take a look at the last part of this sermon after a quick break and see what other insights we can glean
Yeah.
from Job's story. So stay tuned. It's interesting, going through Job's story like this and seeing how this sermon is interpreting it. It really gets me thinking about what faith really means.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's easy to talk about it, but then when you see what Job went through, it makes it so real, so raw.
I agree. And what I think is so powerful about this sermon is that it doesn't try to sugarcoat it. Job's faith journey, like it acknowledges his doubts, his anger, even his questioning of God.
Yeah.
He's not just some, saint who just accepts everything perfectly.
Yeah. Like, there's that part where his wife tells him to just curse God and die.
Yeah.
And his response is so human,
Oh, absolutely.
He's like, "Are you kidding me?" But you can just hear the pain in his words.
Right.
He's not trying to hide it.
Yeah. He's not denying his feelings.
And I think that's what makes his faith so powerful.
Exactly.
It's not blind obedience, right? It's this faith that's been through the fire.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been tested, challenged, refined.
Yeah, by the suffering.
And that's where this idea of grace
Yeah.
that the sermon keeps coming back to, it just becomes so powerful.
Yeah.
It's not about, being perfect,
Yeah.
having all the answers.
Yeah.
It's about receiving God's love and support even when we're broken, we're doubting, we're angry.
So it's not about pretending everything is okay. It's about acknowledging the hard stuff, the darkness, but still holding on to that little flicker of hope,
Right.
that belief that there's, something greater.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge the sermon puts to us.
Okay.
How do we cultivate that kind of faith
Yeah.
that can handle, the ups and downs, that can find meaning in suffering?
It's a huge question. We all face stuff, right?
Me too.
We all have those things that test us.
Yeah.
Maybe not on the same scale as Job, but still.
Right.
And it seems like this sermon is saying we need to remember Job's story.
Yeah.
Remember that doubt and anger, they're not the opposite of faith.
Right. They're part of it.
Yeah, they're part of the journey. And even when we feel completely alone,
Yeah.
we have to remember God's grace is still there.
Absolutely. Sustaining us,
Yeah.
guiding us,
Yeah.
leading us to a deeper understanding of who we are.
Wow. That's a really powerful message. Job's story, it's not a fairy tale. It doesn't have easy answers.
Okay.
It's messy.
It is.
And it's real.
Yeah.
And the sermon is asking us to embrace that, I think, to wrestle with those tough questions.
Yeah.
And to find hope in it.
Even in the dark times.
Yeah. So, wow, as we finish this deep dive, I feel like in awe of Job's strength
Yeah.
and the power of grace.
Yeah.
And just how, this ancient story still speaks to us today.
It does.
I'm really curious, like, what about you? What resonated with you? How does this make you think about suffering and faith and God?
Oh, it's a question worth sitting with. Maybe even exploring the book of Job a little more on your own. I think there's a lot of wisdom there that can help us on our own journeys of faith, doubt, and discovery.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep searching.
Now that we have unpacked Book of Job a bit, we encourage you to reflect on how these truths can be applied to your life this week. For ongoing encouragement, follow Grace Gospel Church on social media GGEFDE on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and more. Subscribe for more deep dive conversations each week as we explore the messages from Grace Gospel Church. For more resources to grow in faith, visit www.gracegospel.church. We pray for your continued growth in faith.